Good evening, televiewers. Welcome to Prime Hour on My Media Prime. We are very sorry for the late start. We make machines at times. Technology decides to play a foul one on us. This evening, we are going to be looking at Africa's position with respect to the war that is raging in between Russia and Ukraine. We know that some African nations have outrightly and population shown their support for Russia, and we're going to be asking what Ukraine did wrong to Africa and what Russia did so well for Africa that would warrant most Africans to be preferring Russia over what is happening. Is it just the hatred against the West, drawing from the colonial days and neo-colonialism? We are going to be looking at other issues, also touching on this. We are looking at this with our panelists who are in the house already. Dr. Ako, John Ako, is in the house with us. Good evening, Doctor, and welcome.
Yeah, once more, good evening, Leonard, and to all the televiewers of My Media Prime. It is sensitive. Africans once again prove that they will continue saving another master, and that there is lack of maturity on the side of this particular, the black continent, to take full responsibility of its own. Many Africans who endorse the war and supporting the Putin-led invasion of Ukraine have been thinking and relying on the fact that the Europeans have caused them a lot of pains, that the West has caused a lot of inhuman treatment on Africans during colonizations, and that still behave up to date, that they are the master and that Africans continue to be their servants or slaves, that the purpose of slave trade was to dehumanize the African continent. But today, we see a continent, its citizens, its leadership, that still feel that it is right to have a contrary power to that of the West, and to them, day is done, and that the Russians present a more better option today. Are Africans not good enough to manage things of their own? Must we always rob Peter in order to pay Paul? What of the new master? Will it be the same? Will it produce anything different? African mindset need to change, that nobody will change Africa except African themselves. We have to believe in the African education. We have to believe in the African religion. We have to believe in the system, the traditional institutions which we created. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. We have to fear the Lord of our own. And if we continue to think that we can use the Russians to chase away the Americans, what will become if they go and the Russians can't produce any necessary impact? Many African countries, like leadership, are thinking that they were humiliated some time ago by Western empowered leaders. And so supporting Russians today will be a counterforce to stand and maybe counteract the Americans and the Europeans. The world is in need of friends than enemies. Can Africans create more friends than chasing the friends they have had? There is always this general saying that a devil you know is better than an angel you are still expecting. Little. No empire has been constructed, yet no African can give you an example of a Russian-raised territory in and around Africa. A lot of what we have seen Russian, the military might. Can we construct Africa with guns and weapons, which we are now today very proud to sign military agreements because the Russians are winning fatly in the weapon or arms domain? Can Africa really develop in the domain of arms? Do we even need arms to develop Africa? Do we need military to develop Africa? Africa needs more better, cultivated opinions, civilizations to empower its own very people, rather than depending on the military might of foreigners than the economic might of the needy.
Okay, we also are in the company of Ndifor Richard. Good evening, Ndifor, and welcome. And I'll start by congratulating you for your appointment this evening by the national chairman of the Social Democratic Front as you are a shadow cabinet member now, shadow cabinet minister, in charge of.
I'm a member of NEC.
Huh?
I'm a member of NEC. Yeah. National, as Assistant National Secretary for Education and Political Education and Training. Thank you so much, Leonard, for that. And I want to thank my co-panelists and our viewers. The issue of Ukraine and the West and African involvement is a very a complex one. And when we look at this, it is very important that we make this distinction between what are the official positions of African governments and the positions of generally of the people of Africa, so to speak. We understand that sometime in I think early on in April, I don't know whether that was April or March, a resolution was signed at the UN General Assembly in which most African countries abstained from that resolution. Most of them stayed neutral, and we want to try understanding why many of these countries, including even South Africa, which initially had put up a strongly worded statement condemning Russian invasion of Ukraine, but later backtracked on that and started blaming the West for its involvement in Russia and expanding into the eastern borders of Russia. We understand that the reason why many Africans are being reluctant to take a firm position, they're skeptical, is because of strategic, military, and diplomatic reasons. We know that early on, some African countries had already started signing military accords and alliances with Russia, and this is because Russia signed some of these alliances without the constraint of asking African countries to respect human rights. Unlike the West, we remember that sometime in 2014, America refused to engage into a military alliance with Nigeria because of Nigeria's gross human rights record. And so Russia is engaging with African countries without this constraint, without demanding from them that they respect human rights. And so for this reason, many African countries are being very careful not to sever diplomatic ties or to hurt Russia, and in that case, sever diplomatic ties with Russia. Many others are also see Western engagement or the war in Ukraine as Russia on the one hand against the West and Ukraine on the other hand, and they think that the West is imposing itself on Russian borders. Coming to look at the people of Africa generally, the people of Africa generally have this hatred for West that sometimes I find it very difficult to understand where it's coming from. But there is this antagonism that many Africans have against the West, probably coming from the Western, the colonization of Africa, the history of colonization, and also the fact that we have the neo-colonial the neo-colonialism that is still very much at play in many African countries, especially in French Africa today. And so many are seeing this as an opportunity in which Russia will be challenging the West, which seemed to have imposed itself as the big brother for the war. And so they see the Russian invasion as some kind of an opportunity for the Russians to challenge Western domination of world politics. And so it is in this context that we find African participation or Africans' involvement in the war in Ukraine and in and their support seemingly for Russia.
Okay, but this war has just presented an opportunity of a divide between the West and the East. When you look at the African posture, its population, where should their interests lie?
Well, African interest, as we understand, in any diplomatic situation like the one we find right now, the most important thing for the Africans, especially African leaders, is to ensure, first of all, to protect their interests and their position, which of course have been threatened, because if you see many Africans leaders who are dictators, so to speak, have been threatened by the West by imposing sanctions and imposing strict conditions for them to respect and to fight corruption and all of that, and to respect democratic principles. Many of these are things that many African countries or many African leaders are not very happy with, and they're not very comfortable with. And so that is the one aspect of it. And then another aspect of it is this whole military alliance that we are talking about. And then there is also the economic factor that we know that Africa rely heavily for its wheat from Moscow. And they rely on Moscow supplying this wheat. And so Africa is very careful not to get into a situation where such supply will be cut off from Africa and therefore affect African economy.
Okay, where should our interests as Africans lie today?
I believe the war in Ukraine simply came somehow, in fact, to inspire Africans.
Okay.
We're supposed to be inspired rather than putting a confrontation, or rather than getting into debates. One of the things which we have to be inspired is agriculture, meaning it has taken Africa 60 years, 70 years after independence. We are unable to have sustainability in none of the domain. The political domain we cannot control. Economically, we are nowhere. Socially and culturally, we have nothing to offer. If Ukraine and Russia are feeding the whole of Africa from their wheat, I mean wheat, we are not adding cassava, we are not adding plantains, tomatoes, or what others, or what can talk of meat. Now, the absence of wheat is creating pain. It will mean tomorrow, if the war will go on with Pakistan, India, or Vietnam, then there will be a problem with rice. So can Africans learn from this particular war that we are just weak and that we need to reinforce? Instead of strengthening strategies to be self-reliant, we don't need to fight anybody. The voting of a resolution, like just mentioned, against Russia, Africans abstain as people who can abstain from world economic power. We need to abstain from things which we know we can stand by ourselves. The war in Russia, on the other domain, should give us an idea that why the fight for Africa? Why is Africa getting himself into a domain that does not even concern him? Diplomatically, we lose nothing in condemning Russians act. Yes, many Africans will tell you that they can't condemn Russia because of what Russia is. Within the communist spirit, it is not within the Russian government to intervene into the internal, they call it internal affairs of nations. Internal affairs of nations, which have to do with their sovereignty. We mean Russia will never come to tell a government how you should manage your own people. You need to be a dictator. You need to be a sadist to see that your people are under suffering, and you will like somebody that continuously encourages the suffering of your own people. Nobody is capable of ordering or challenging you in a domain in a way you like. You can be a neutral person in international law, but then you cannot be silent when certain serious crimes are committed. It is totally outlawed for you to take weapons and attack another nation, for you to kill people inextricably, without any consent. Russia took what they call a preventive step. That to him, prevention is better than cure. They are encroaching into the borders of Russia. And we ask, if Russia has to take on Lugansk and Donetsk, does that take him away from Western nations or takes him more closer to Western nations? We realize that the politics in Ukraine was completely fake. It is not like we have found, or Russia find a threat in Ukraine, because none before the war, no Russian citizen have been killed or harassed by Ukrainian forces within that same line. Russia has harassed, has aggressed a lot of people in Ukraine than Ukraine has even done before the war. Africa need to learn a lesson that we have no reason Yes, it was surprising, in fact shocking, and more embarrassing that the president of the African Union, Macky Sall, moved to Russia, but we are still expecting to see Macky Sall visit African countries going under war. We have this, what we call the African Union seat in Addis Ababa. Ethiopia is presently going through a serious stress with the Tigray rebels. Has Macky Sall visited the Tigray region in Ethiopia? Has he visited northwest and the southwest of Cameroon? Has he visited the Boko Haram infested areas in northern Nigeria? We need to come out very clearly to say, if Africans love themselves, what is our cause in Ukraine? We are going to fight and asking Vladimir Putin to clear up the port in Odessa so that wheat can come. Is that the solution to African sustainability in a weak agricultural domain? Agriculture, which is one of the riches that Africa has to impose on the world. We have natural lands that we can upgrade and import a lot of resources so that Africa can become one. If we cannot sell diamond, if we cannot sell television, if we cannot sell the telephones, can we sell rice, red oil? Can we sell meat? Can we export potato? We don't need anything. Can we export fresh banana? We need to concentrate in Africa. Macky Sall needed at this hour to bring on an agenda on how Africa can become self-sustainable, and that after the war, the wheat Russians and Ukraine are thinking that will be for the feeding, and I don't know how the nursing of Africans will just be history, and that will not need it again, because agriculturally Africa is strong enough to grow its own rice, to grow its own yam, to grow its own wheat. We have natural gas. Can the African Union, the African Development Bank, sponsor such project? Remember, before and after the Second World War, there was what we call the Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and we saw the impact. There is what they call the Marshall Plan in Europe that worked well. Can we have our own, maybe name Macky Sall plan for Africa, so that Africa will become sustainable after the war? We should be thinking on how to re-arm Africa sustainably in terms of agriculture. Politically, are African leaders ready to sustain or to keep off power? There is greed in Africa. This is just what we see in Africa, because even Africans, some hide behind their keyboard abroad. You are living within a country which is feeding you, clothing you, giving you social benefit, then you still have the guts and the mind to criticize and write trash against the United States and the West. But you are living in that country. In the same country we call and we are supporting Putin or Russia, you cannot talk. You cannot even express an opinion against Putin. You will remember that there is a need for liberty. Yes, people said there are propaganda wars. They say wars of national liberation or war against undemocratic regimes. There is a need. Everybody, before you get into a market, you must have what to sell. What are Africans presenting to world politics? If we cannot, then there is no need to support Ukraine or whatsoever, but we have a right to condemn human rights violation no matter who perpetrated them. Don't use history because colonization, because they attacked Libya, because they were in Syria. How is that going to help us? We need to rearm ourselves and think of never that solidarity. So many people don't know that one of the biggest principles in the function and operationality of the European Union is solidarity among the 27 member countries. Can Africa have such a level that we move north, west, south to north without any problem? Can Africans that? We have a lot of problems just eating within our own borders, beating up our own brothers. We have a lot of things. I said and I insist, supporting a killer makes you equally a killer. Do we stand to see that sometime in future, any president with a military might in Africa can attack any other country and continue killing? We don't use history to justify our wrongful act. We use history to better off the situation today. History is for lessons so that we correct the errors of the future, not to repeat the errors of the past.
Okay. Ndifor Richard, we are talking about a war that is raging on between Ukraine and Russia. What is a crime of Ukraine? Because seemingly Ukraine might have done something so grievous in Africa that would warrant support for Russia. What did Ukraine? Did Ukraine colonize any country in Africa?
No, Leonard, the issue here, like we said earlier, is not Ukraine per se. The issue here is the West, and Africans are venting their anger on the West. They don't have much of a problem with Ukraine. The only problem they have with Ukraine is the fact that Ukraine is being backed by the West, and that they have the support of the West. And so they, like I said earlier, Africans see this war as a war between Russia and the West, and not as a war between Russia and Ukraine. And that is why, and when I'm talking about generally the people of Africa, the common man, the man on the street, and the way they see this. Because when we talk about the leadership, the governments of Africa, like we said earlier, they're only doing so for strategic reasons. They have strategic reasons, the mining and energy links with Russia, the military alliances with Russia, the food sufficiency, and they're scared of the effect of that on African continent. Those are the things that they put into consideration. But the common man on the street, the ordinary Africans, they hate the West with passion. They see their current predicament, their state of affairs, the way Africans are living today. They blame everything on the West. We have had situations where Africans feel that everything in Africa is caused by the West, and that the West are the cause of all their predicament, of all their problems. And it has become so serious that Africans do not want to think for themselves. They do not want to move forward. They want to hang on this idea of, oh, the West has done this, the West has done that. And so they spend so much time blaming the West and so little time trying to find solutions to the problems that are affecting Africa today. Everywhere across Africa and in many political discourse concerning Western involvement in Africa, Africans, and what we see is that most of our leaders who in my opinion have contributed more, they have contributed even more than 70% to our predicament, to what we are having today in Africa. Many of them have seen this opportunity, they have seen this window of opportunity, and they are now hanging on it. They are now using this issue of, oh, the West are the cause of our problem, and they are playing that and using that to defend themselves and to gain popularity. They use this anti-Western strategy to win the masses, to win the support of the masses, to win the support of the general population in Africa. And so this has become a real problem, and Africans need to step back and ask themselves, what can we do for Africa? What can we do to liberate ourselves from whatever situation that we find ourselves in Africa? Because basically,
let me cue you. You say the West is blamed for most of our problems back here in Africa. How true is it when you go by what is happening in Africa? How do we lay blames and so strong on the fact that it is the West that is very responsible for all we are going through 60 years after independence?
Definitely, we cannot blame the West for the things. Yes, it is true that the West is responsible as a result of the colonization of Africa. The West took us several years behind. It is also true that the West, through their agents in Africa, through leaders that they have implanted in Africa, they are creating problems in Africa. They are tapping our resources. They are, for example, we have the so-called French-African alliance with its former colonies and all of that. But the truth is, the real problems that Africa is facing today is their leadership, is African leadership. African leadership is the core, is the problem that Africa is facing today. And even if we talk about the Western influence have been allowed and propagated and promoted by our leaders. Our leaders are fully responsible to open our doors for Western influence. Many of our leaders seem to use the West to want to hang to power, to remain in power. And even though the West is preaching the issue of democracy and all of that, they too try to protect their own interests. They have their own interests to protect. And so therefore, What I think Africans should be doing is that Africans should be holding their leaders accountable. Africans should be finding a way of ensuring that better leaders, accountable leaders, are elected into offices. And leaders who do not have ties with the West, leaders that do not have strong ties with maybe France, for example, because most of these neo-colonial policies, they are ingrained mostly in French African countries. And so therefore, if these ties with African leaders and these French and their French powers and French Western influence is cut off, I think we can start finding a way of addressing our problem. But then, like I said earlier, our problem, the solution of our problem rests in our hands. We cannot blame the West for everything that is going wrong in Africa. We need to share part of that blame. We spend most of our times blaming them and doing very little to find a solution to those problems, which is what we should start doing.
Okay, we should start doing. Now, Dr. Ako, John Ako, how do you started developing that already, how do we understand that today Africans are rushing to Russia, like you cited about President Macky Sall already, at a time when Africa should be considered as the breadbasket for the world?
Yeah, it's just to Africans now, you know, our politicians, like you see what Richard is saying, they have to them strategically, Russia is going to bring in new inputs. You know, when China presented itself to the world, the stage of the world, Africans moved to China and signed other conventions with Chinese. A lot of those who are in government want to bring in more loans. They are not going there for anything otherwise. They want to go to conventions that will favor them, they think. And those conventions, I am saying that, will continue to indebt the African continent. Remember, Cameroon just signed a military agreement with Russia. And at the height of the crisis, it is when we choose to sign a military agreement. If it was an economic agreement, we could think that it's going to be a new putsch. But if it becomes a military agreement, then those who are in power knows very strongly that the West can only overcome them when it comes to military. So they need the military to stand, and then they continue to stay in power. And others have applauded, like we are talking. What is even worrying that many Africans don't know is that Russia has never condemned any act carried out by some of those leaders. In fact, those we call them kings and queens in Africa who have refused to leave, that their actions have never meant anything to Russia. That a lot of Western nations have reported African countries that violate a lot of rights. We were at least going to be settled with a country like South Africa, but South Africa will start explaining that Russia has been a friend during the apartheid. And we asked if the issue of apartheid was fought only by Russians. Africans too supported the same South Africa for the fight against apartheid. It was a poor practice that saw the condemnation of the whole world. And so how is Russia so special in the case that instead of looking at Ukraine, we see the whole of West, meaning the Europe and Americans on one hand, and we forget about the suffering of a common Ukrainian who live in his town just to get up one morning and find military armories around their quarter or their village. And it gives us again that those who really control the African mindset will still confirm to it that we have successfully convinced these people. You know, a lot of people like in China, they will tell you that the only continent where you take things and make them feel that you are superior to them are Africans. It means that we still believe, even today, when we were insulted by the West yesterday, that if the West cannot do it, we'll go for the East, that the East are better than the West. Can we do it by ourselves? Why are we unable to ask questions that we will do it? Against any backdrop, Africa moving to the West, to the East, equally gives us the feeling that we are not capable of doing things even in the next century. Meaning, there is no benchmark. Yes, few countries make a lot of propaganda. We were to emerge by 2035, and we are in 2022. A lot of people will start asking, is the emergence possible economically, by agriculture, road infrastructure, education, science and technology? Can we be proud in any domain that we have raised for these 2 or 5 years and that it is doing well? Can we link on one domain and make it wealth for the nation. We are supposed to think that strategically, where do we present ourselves? If Russia can give this worry to the whole of the European Union, in which domain can Africa pose a strength to the whole world? Can we stop our banana and affect Europe? Can we stop our tomatoes? Will it affect Europe? Can we stop our red oil production and affect the European markets? A lot of people don't even ask this question. You find them telling you that the war in Libya was unnecessary. In Syria they did. If not of Russia, they would have done so. If not of Africa, the world would have been leveraging in poverty. We would be happy to have such declaration that the food that we sent to China in 1970, 30 years after, we can feed the whole world. Can we be proud of this? Why do you use another person's reputation to build your own argument? This is where I think a lot of people are getting wrong. Russians will never come to construct or help Africans. If they send soldiers to your country, make sure and be sure that you are going to feed them. The salary they pay those guys living out of Russia to fight in Africa will be paid by our government. Are we ready to support an extra budget? Meaning they will still bring loan and then we use the same loan to pay them back. Remember what happened with the 75 billion project on microcomputers that we borrowed from China, and the Chinese bank looked for the supplier and paid the money in China. We didn't touch a franc, but we are going to pay 75 billion. Those same computers got back just 2 months, 3 months after they were distributed. Are these sustainable projects? Are this the nation we support? I prefer a nation that will support us with vast land of agriculture invested in rice that will be produced here, not the type of conventions we are signing that will make us continuously be beggars. If we sign militarily, because a lot, those who support Russia are on the military background. They want a military force that will be compared or capable of contradicting what the Europeans and the Americans are doing. Is that what Africa needs? We still have water problem. We still have electricity problem. We still have transportation problem. Have we solved any? What of health? Can we cure malaria? A disease that has been killing millions of Africa. Have we provided a single tablet that can cure and treat this particular disease? This is how countries emerge, not by weaponry.
Okay, not by weaponry. Let's look at Africans. When they're in problems, Ndifor Richard, I hardly hear Africans say we are looking up to Russia to come and intervene and save us from dictatorship and a host of others. We always hear them say, oh, the US Congress has spoken, the US Senate has spoken, the EU Parliament is going to do something. We look up to the West to solve our problems. We turn our backs to them when there is a problem.
Yes, Leonard, that is the contradiction that I find among Africans, ordinary Africans. Sometimes I really do not understand where they stand on certain issues, because you will understand that most of the things that ordinary Africans are calling for, I'm talking about fight against corruption, I'm talking about fight against tyranny and dictatorship in Africa, the improvement of democracy in Africa. We are talking about addressing issues like poverty, addressing issues like unemployment and all of that. Most of these issues that affect the lives of ordinary Cameroonians are those things that the West stand for. Those are the things that the West is pushing. But when it comes to countries like Russia and China and Russia, they are not the kind of nations that push Africans towards the fight for human rights, the fight for democracy and all of that. You will notice that in most recently, loans that are being given to African governments from China and from Russia, they are not tied to any constraints like you must respect human rights, you must respect democratic principles and all of that. Rather, it is the West that put those conditions, put those constraints. And that is why most African countries are shifting gears and moving towards Russia, because they feel that Russia and China will obviously give them those things without putting those constraints and putting those conditions, putting those conditions for them. And one would think that Africans, ordinary Africans, will be opposing that kind of relationship, that kind of diplomatic relationship in which their interest is not put at the center of any such negotiation, and they would rather want to be supporting a diplomatic tie and diplomatic relationship with the West that usually put on such conditions. On the contrary, most Africans go in for, they support, they back Russia, they back China in most of these things, because not really because they love China, not really because they love Russians, but because of this anti-Western feeling, this anti-Western sentiment that we have among Africans. It is so serious, Leo, that Africans would support anything that is anti-West. And this has been made worse by most of the Western Pan-Africanists. Most of those who call themselves Pan-Africanists today, they have sent out a lot of propaganda that creates the impression that everything bad that is happening in Africa is caused by the West. That if Africa is going through pains today and suffering, is by the West. They even go further to suggest that even the wars that are fought in Africa, they have been fought because of the West. The West are the ones sponsoring those wars and selling their weapons and doing all of that. So this kind of narrative and this kind of propaganda have been so much ingrained among Africans that have built so much hate and anti-Western feelings among most Africans. And so Africans see the West as a strong enemy, and they do not see them as a friend. And therefore, like I said, they may be supporting the West in this case. They are not necessarily supporting Russia. They may be opposing the West, but they are not necessarily supporting Russia. They are just exhibiting or portraying their hatred for West and their Western influence on Africa. And all of this, like I said earlier, also stem from...
How genuine is this hatred for people that you always run to for assistance? Because be it the governments in Africa, when they are in difficulties, they go to the West for loans. And the population also, when they are oppressed, they expect the Europeans and the Americans to come to their aid. How genuine is this hatred for these guys?
Yeah, yes, there is no secret, Leonard, that the West have always pushed their interest. It has always been Western interest first when they're pushing their interest. And of course, it is normal in any diplomatic. What is diplomacy? Diplomacy is for you to play the game in such a way that it favors you. And therefore, you cannot blame the West for playing the game the way the game is supposed to be played. They play the game in a way that favors them. It is left for the African nations and the African governments to be able to do it in a way that favors Africans and favor the ordinary Africans on the ground. But unfortunately, one of the things is that most African leaders do not think about the ordinary people. They think about themselves. And that is why diplomatic ties and diplomatic relationship with other countries are not done in the interest of the people. They are done in the interest of the leaders. They say, whatever they are doing, they try to make sure that whatever relationship they have with anybody, it should be that which will protect their position, protect them in power, and ensure that they stay on in power for as long as possible. So it is very tricky and very difficult to state if it is the hatred for the West is genuine. But what I will say is that the West is playing the game. They're playing the diplomatic game the way they're supposed to play the game. No nation is going to be playing diplomacy for you to win and then they lose. They will always play it in their interest. It is for you to bargain powerfully so that there is a win-win situation on either side. But if your own interest is, the West come there and their interest is their people, the Western people, the development of the West, what they can get from Africa and take it back to the West. It is for Africa to ask themselves, how much do we gain from these guys, taking it back to our own people? If they don't do that, how do you blame the West for that? Okay. I don't see how you blame the West for the failure of our own leaders. And that is why I said earlier that our leaders are responsible for our predicament. The earlier we ordinary Africans start seeing that the problems we are facing is our leaders and not the West, the better for us.
Good evening, Mr. Liu and the panel. The war in Ukraine is unfortunate as any other anywhere in Africa, especially in the northwest and southwest Cameroon. Indeed, Macky Sall and co should be investing in agriculture so that by this time next year we should be selling wheat, rice, maize, etc. to the West. The feeling of Africans on the street, especially towards Russia, is understandable. At least Russia was the only superpower that was against the killing of Muammar Gaddafi. The Pan-Africanist mindset must be to empower Africa through Africans. Thank you very much for the subject. Chiri is writing from Boya. Thank you, Chiri. Chiri says that he wants us to see what is happening as an opportunity to prepare ourselves and learn so that we can be self-sufficient agriculturally. But he raises the issue that, okay, anti-West is because of Muammar Gaddafi. Then Russia condemned it. But we are in a war in Cameroon, and the U.S. has condemned, U.S. Congress and the Congress and Senate, yes. And then we've seen the EU also talk about it. Why is nobody seeing the interests, condemnations that are coming from the EU and this, and everybody is quick to quote what happened in Libya?
Yeah, one of the things I would also like us to know is that when God created man, he gives him the liberty, the will to stand and the will to fall. Okay. Either way, at times we choose it, suits our argument. A lot of people put the debate that Russia was the only country that condemned the killing of Muammar Gaddafi.
But Russia had the opportunity to veto. When
Russia had the opportunity to veto. Russia still had the opportunity to have equally stationed weapons, like he did in Syria, in Libya, that nobody should come here. I want people to equally know that the most successful military purchase of weapons done by Gaddafi was done with the Russians. And to be honest enough, Russia abandoned Gaddafi on the eve of the war. Russia abstained from the UN security vote. Abstain, meaning you fail to oppose, that they are free to attack. A lot of people don't have this information. And it was shocking. If France attacked Libya with anger, it was the economic, the military agreement for the purchase of French weapons was not successful with Sarkozy, but he was surprised that the Russian agreement, which was made after Sarkozy agreement with Tripoli, went right ahead. And Russia delivered a lot of weapons to Libya. On the contrary, Libya paid huge sums of money. Why that contract signed with the French was not concluded maturely. A lot of agreements were made. People should think, well, that Gaddafi was in Élysée in Paris. They signed a lot of military agreements, but then no contract went to maturity. But those that were signed with Russia went to maturity right up to the last day. Some of those weapons that were used by Libyans to fight the West were supplied by Russians. But what today, what are we seeing? Russia is unable to condemn. I mean, just condemning the war in southern Cameroon. Russia has vetoed the United Nations resolution at the Human Rights Commission together with Equatorial Guinea against the war, meaning they are for the war, and that the issue in Cameroon can be solved by Cameroonians. A lot of Cameroonians don't know about this. The United Kingdom House of Commons have discussed a resolution in Cameroon several times. We are still to see if somebody will tell me that the issues affecting Congo Democratic, Central African Republic, or Cameroon have been discussed in the Russian parliament, and this is the position of the Russians. Yes, a lot should equally know that Russia has this principle of non-intervention into local politics. Local politics without the assistance of the other government. But Russia gave us a reason today that he went to Ukraine to support the rebel movement in Donetsk and Lugansk. And he's unable to support movement of liberation in Africa and many other parts of the world. Does that make us reasonable enough? We have to look at it. What he's saying it stands so myopic that many will be using the war in Libya to justify killing in Ukraine. What we have said several times, nobody's mandate, nobody has a mandate to kill anybody, no matter the error of whatsoever. Killing is forbidden. One of the things we need to know, like I said, what has failed me again, Mr. Richard raised it there, but I believe those whom we call them Pan-Africanists are getting it very wrong. The spread and spear of hatred against the West has been channeled and championed by those who call themselves Pan-Africanists. We are Pan-Africanists. Pan-Africanism should not mean hatred for other nations. Pan-Africanism is doing and promoting Africa by the African way. How can we change Africa by ourselves? Not insulting the West. Consider the errors of the past as history. But what has become of the future? The future is that we condemn the United States, we condemn France. What had Africans, as Pan-Africanists, what can Africans offer? Yes, yesterday we were villages, 2 days ago we were quarters, today we are towns, cities, and a country, because nobody knows about Africa. People should know very well too that the wars for colonization, the race for colonization defines a lot of boundaries in Africa. We are still depending on some of those boundaries at the level of the United Nations. Some countries don't even have the original map of their nations. We depend on still Western nations to define our boundaries. It is normal. When you wish to fight, a fight where you are not yet a top actor, a top participant in world politics, it is good to rearm yourself internally. So this is what we are saying. We should try to build Africa internally. What can Africans do within themselves? Nigerians are producing rice. They produce yam. Is it possible for us to depend on Nigerian yam? Cameroon can produce us cassava, gari, and corn flour. Can we rearm Cameroon? Can we develop agriculture so that when we need wine, we don't get wine from France, and that South Africa produces good grapes and they produce good wine? This is what Africa. Can we internally be sustainable rather than depending that the Messiah will come from outside? No Messiah, nobody will help Africa except Africans themselves. The change of the African mindset, the educational system that cannot solve African problems, but we train engineers to go to NASA. You don't have NASA, we are studying physics. How will physics help Africa? Yes, we get there, bring the knowledge and help. How many had come back? Those who came back, we call them professors, doctors, highly qualified engineers, we have been maneuvered and groomed or mixed up into politics, and they even defend the undefendable. This is what Africa has become, that we train lies in school because the things we do are unable to solve African problems. Can we train in the domain that we can make Africa proud? Can Africa impose himself in any domain around the globe? No domain. I mean, malaria drugs are still coming from Europe. We don't believe in the fever grass and many other herbs that we believe can take care of us. There are a lot of things Africa need to do rather than fighting a battle they will never be considered a possible one. When conclusions and agreements will be made, Africans are not going to even sit on any of those tables. We are calling French and calling America to stop supplying weapons. Please, Africa should continue to produce its agriculture to feed its own people. We are not eating because there is war in Ukraine. Some people have even said the prices of red oil in Cameroonian market is as a result of the war in Ukraine. It is completely downgrading that Africans cannot have drinking water. We still depend from the same people to give us clean water 70 years after independence. It is shocking. Pan-Africanism should spread the message of how can we be better off than how can we fight the people we can't even stand a battle.
Okay, the people we can't even stand a battle. What is you, Ndifor Richard, you saw the population of the DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, celebrating Putin, and we've seen similar images from Bangui and other countries. What is happening? What is the messiah in Putin and Russia in saving Africa? Is it possible?
Yes, Leonard. Before I get to that, let me make this point very clear before maybe some people misunderstand what we have been saying. We are not totally saying that the West cannot take some of the responsibilities and some of the blames for what Africa is going through. Africans suffered under the cruel, oppressive, and dehumanizing system of Western colonialism, and over the years, and they have continued even to organize coups in Africa to destabilize the political situation of Africa. That is very, very true. But I am afraid that the blame against the West, we are blaming them even in areas that does not, we don't need to blame them in. For example, 50 years after our independence, our economy is still in shambles. African economic prosperity is nowhere to match other economies in the world, other economies that were also colonized, so to speak. And we also find that our leaders, again, I may be sounding as if I'm repeating myself to blame the leaders, but that is what it is. They have not really earmarked any developmental strategy that would take Africa away from the poverty and move Africa to prosperity in a way that we have seen other countries like South Korea, like even China evolved in recent years. This is because we, like my co-panelists, they said, our over-reliance on the West, our over-reliance on other people to do our job for us. And it is in that same spirit that some people seem to be seeing Russia as the Messiah and relying on Russia and thinking that Russia is the one that will come and save us. We saw that with China. China came to Africa, and a lot of people earlier on started saying, oh, China is the Messiah, China is coming to help. But we saw what happened. We saw that China was not the Messiah we thought China was. China was actually coming to tap from African resources, was actually coming to be another colonial power, imperial power in Africa. And that is where we are heading to, embracing Russia. When we start embracing Russia, we are simply sending out an invitation for Russia to come back and colonize Africa. And so we as Africans should start thinking of being self-sufficient, start thinking of how we can address our own problems without relying on neither Russia, China, the United States, or whatever country is going to solve the African problems for them. None of these countries, like I mentioned earlier, each one of these can be their own interests. They may not portray this interest, they may not put it out there in the open for you to see, but you should be rest assured. You should have it at the back of your mind that no power will come to you to give and not take back. There is none. It doesn't happen like that anywhere. All of these powers are coming to tap from Africa. They find Africa to have the enormous resources that they can tap from. They see Africa as an area, as a minefield where they can come and exploit. And so they use different strategies. Their strategies might just be different from what the West used, but all ends up in the same objective. They all have the same objective, the same goal, to reap from Africa, to tap away from Africa. And so Africans need to learn from this. Africans need to learn. And the only way that we can get ourselves out of this is for us to start electing real leaders, start getting in real leaders, leaders that are concerned for the development of Africa, leaders that are concerned for the interests of the people of Africa, and not leaders that are concerned for themselves, who think about themselves, who are there to protect themselves and protect their position. And that is exactly the problem we are having today. The problem we have today in Africa is that most of these African leaders are looking for their own protection. And any diplomatic relationship, any diplomatic ties they're doing so in order to find a way to protect their interests. And you will understand that even the West, that it's talk about pro-democracy and then preach democracy and preach human rights, you will notice that they are hesitant to let their allies who are in power step down. They will not want their allies who are in power step down. In 1992 in Cameroon, for example, if if Frundi did not become president, it was largely because of France. France is the Western country. It was largely because of France, because France did not want their ally Paul Biya to move from there, and that goes the same with all of these other countries. And so, whatever, they are just these different powers, be it Russia, be in the West or whatever. They are all just using different approaches to arrive at the same destination, to arrive at the same goal. And that goal is to exploit Africa. African interest is never in their agenda. Their agenda has never been African interest. And so to me, it is stupid for Africans to even be finding themselves playing these stupid games with Russia and the West. They would have even been best just staying quiet and being neutral and not even being actively involved in supporting one side or the other, because they are all out there to exploit you, to exploit our resources, to continue to subject us under colonialism and under the spell of European influence, where they will come and reap whatever they want to reap from us. And so nobody should be fooled to think that there is any messiah in Russia, in Putin. Neither is there any messiah in China, nor is there anyone in the West. And so therefore, again, what we should be thinking of doing is to get leaders who will negotiate diplomatically for our own interests, in the interest of Africa and the interest of the African people, and not for their own personal interests.
Now, you are talking from the US. I want you to paint a practical experience. You're in the US. How many Cameroonians actually benefit from the organized structure that the US has put in place, the UK and European? How much of benefit do we derive from these countries compared with those who go to Russia? How does Africa benefit from the West and Russia from the perspective of its citizens who migrate to these two regions of the world?
Yes, Leonard, I may not be able to speak very much about Russia. I've never been to Russia, and I don't have many friends in Russia who could share their experiences with me. But what I know for sure is that speaking with ordinary Cameroonians out here in the United States, they feel very satisfied that they are living in an organized system. They feel, and they are proud of that. They talk about it so proudly, about the way the American system is organized, the way it becomes very difficult for corruption to, though corruption is not totally absent here in the United States, but the fact that it is not as pronounced as we have it back home in Cameroon, the fact that they can find job when they need one and can make money, the fact that they can speak freely against the government and not be afraid of being prosecuted or being arrested and locked up. All of these are the experiences of Cameroonians out here in the United States, and most probably the same experiences in places like Canada, in places like UK, and all of that. We have Africans who are, and sometimes they question why some of these things, why our own leaders back in Africa cannot copy some of these examples back home. Now, what I know personally about Russia is that in Russia, it is not as easy for you to criticize Putin as it is for you to criticize Biden here in the United States. Freedom of expression is not as freedom of expression is not as guaranteed in Russia as it is here in the United States. That is the difference. That's the difference between both countries. And if we have to factor that into what we into the conversation we are having here, we will see that you see why some of us are a little bit confused, why many Africans are rather supporting Russia and backing Russia in this whole conflict of between Russia and Ukraine. And again, like my brother in the studio mentioned, This is a clear case of an aggressor. This is the specific case of Ukraine and Russia, leaving aside the interests of Africans. This is a clear case of an aggressor against attacking, aggressing a weaker state, in this case, Ukraine. And in this whole scenario, the people who are the Ukrainians, we find that ordinary Ukrainians have been subjected to the pains, they have been subjected to sufferings. And when I see Africans looking at this situation, coming from Africa where there have been war, where we have experienced war, where we have seen the pains of war, and then to realize that we are rather jubilating and celebrating the pains of others, it becomes quite amazing and quite surprising that anybody from Africa should be in a position where we are happy seeing that Ukrainians are going through the pains that they are going through. Because we as Africans, we have experienced so much war that we are in a better position to be empathizing with the Ukrainian than any other group of people. But the mixed among Africans, the way Africans are reacting to this, leaves so many people really doubting what really is happening. For the African leaders and their position, like we talk of the strategic position, it is understandable that they take those positions for strategic, economic, and political reasons.
Okay. I don't know whether you also tell me that you don't know people who are in Russia compared with those who are in the UK. How do we explain? Where do we receive more benefits from our brothers and sisters living in these two parts of the world?
Yeah, I believe somehow academically you find a lot of Africans and Cameroonian students along the Russian-Ukraine border. I'm telling you that there are some Cameroonians, Russia used to be promising too academically in terms of medicine and science. And so a lot of students gained scholarships and were sent to Russia. Likewise, in Ukraine of recent too, educationally we tap a lot from there. That's one of the manpower we need in the African continent and Cameroon in particular. But it is so frightening that people support from where, when we talk in other domains, that there are more Africans and Cameroonians more in Europe and America than they have been in the Soviet Union altogether. We have to take it very wisely that a lot of people, again, when they consider it just the language barrier with Russia is keeping us away from participating or even working with the Russians in any dimension. It has made a lot of us not to even know, we know little or nothing about the Russian economy, and we can equally affirm that the Russian Republic is too tight and very close. Information doesn't move out of Russia like we do acquire on other platforms as concerned the Europeans and the Americans, or whatever we call the Westerners. It is, again, giving us a reasoning that freedom of expression and the rights of man, if we compare them otherwise, like Mr. Ndifor is saying, that Cameroonians and Africans celebrate America. They are comfortable being in America, but we have equally to know that there is no society in the world where we talk of 100% perfect or 100% rate of acquisition or liberty. Somewhere, rights at times are forbidden, if not by the state, but by other armed groups or whatsoever. In Russia, it is more than that. We have a lot of regions where you don't even have the liberty to get in. We have a lot of regions you cannot even come out because you are a member of that particular region. A lot of things go on in Russia. We might not find it filtering a lot of networks, but people are capable of assessing how many have been killed in a church in the United States or in a school, so that we know how bad the United States has become, and even when such criticisms are being handled within the United States. A lot of those platforms are being hosted by UN-based organizations. This is equally something we have to think that in a liberal society, equally promotes development, human development, economic, political development, which we are unable to find here. A lot of Africans, not even Cameroonians, not even on scholarship, presently might have found themselves in the United States or Europe, and they feel more comfortable at home, especially those that have taken the nationality. When you become a French national, a British national, the same rights are accorded to all without distinction. But then we are still to have such a feeling that we might feel at home. We have heard of the disaster of COVID while African students were found in China. A lot were asked to leave and they left. But we are still to see such situations that might be happening because COVID killed a lot in Europe than any part of the world, but they haven't chased people out of school. A lot of students were advised to leave, others were locked up, and all they will tell you that there are still measures of control. Africans feel more at ease and at home in some of Western nations than they do with some brutal regime, like what the Putin Empire has constructed in Russia. Yes, a lot will need to know that Putin has what I call the anger, the fight that why Russia failed, why the Soviet Union failed, why Gorbachev signed the type of agreement he did, and that he was weak and he was not a strong leader. And now he as a strong man, when you find him, he came out in an interview last week telling to the whole Russian press how Russia has been more successful during the war and how Russia is getting stronger instead, and that the sanctions placed against Russia are equally healing fruits in the West by hurting Western economies. That is certain that international politics, in international law, every actor is needed. That is why I said sometime that the world is in need of friends than enemies. Can Russia equally join NATO? Some people tell me that it is not done. If Russia is for peace, if peace is what all of us clamor, if everybody wish to seek peace around the world, there is a need for Russia to be an active participant and a member of NATO to protect world peace. Take the same arms NATO is having. One of the reasons that makes us feel presently is that really Russia surely has the fear for NATO weapons, because if not, a place or building of weapons which are not even directed towards your backyard cause you to think that you should attack another nation. Africans should then start thinking, can the whole of African AU become a member of NATO too, so that you feel safe and secured? These are the type of reasoning that you can see countries like Sweden and Finland are addressing themselves. That if Russia becomes a threat to world politics, peace, and security, we can find an organization that is capable of protecting our own peace than using an organization that becomes a protagonist to international security. So we need such African thoughts that if Africa can become a member of NATO, wouldn't it be better? You find today that a bloc that is more security strong poses a threat to another person who feels that he can never be part of such an organization. Okay. NATO as an organization is open to all those who feel to have security among themselves. We are supposed to look upon ways of sustaining Africa, like I'm saying, rather than looking at ways to contradict or to abandon or to create hatred with other main participants that we have had here. Within the African continent today, a lot of others are thinking and have been wondering, can African security, or what we call the AU security motive, not be that strong, not be that powerful to fight Africans or to fight enemies of the African continent? Okay. Why has the AU not been capable of maintaining a continental military force that is capable of contradicting whatever evil is perpetrated by bad leadership within the African continent? That's what the Europeans are doing. You cannot mismanage or hijack elections in Europe without the whole of the European Union being concerned. Can we have such a system that, first of all, protect ourselves before depending on secondary force out of Africa?
Good evening, Sir Leonard and Sir John Ako. I love this program dearly. May God protect Sir John Ako for speaking the truth. He is so versed with world history. May he live long to educate me. Vivian is writing from Yaoundé. Good evening to you, Vivian. Good day to all. Dictators will always support other dictators. Anybody supporting Russia is a killer. I am Boo Waters, writing from Melong. Okay, good evening. Mr. Liu, let us, the Africans, learn from our past mistakes. The West have overexploited us. Is Modet writing from Compina if you are watching the program and you have a contribution, you can call. I will receive your call so that you can contribute. The world will listen to you. Mr. Leo, greetings to you. People in the studio, I would say we can't do without the West to help us politically. Why did I say so? Is because our leaders have decided to stay in power, implanted by the West. So for us to come out of the cage is to engage with the same most powerful game changer of West. Then we can now think of other developments like agriculture, mining, etc. The whole ball game is an eye running. The war in Ukraine is being caused by the USA by making a group called NATO because of expansion and greed to reduce Russia's territory to maintain most powerful nation with her own bloc to control the war. Okay. Don't know. Hope you're calling to participate. Good evening, sir. Your name and where you're calling from?
Evelyn calling from Boya.
Okay.
Yes. Can I go on?
Yes, go on, Evelyn.
Yeah. Where are you calling from? I'm Evelyn. I'm calling from Boya.
Move away from your screen. Just contribute. Go on.
Okay, I will preach to second Sunday. I'll not be reading my messages.
Okay. Can you now contribute?
The messages for almost about 2 months now. I'm not happy.
Evelyn, I'll be reading them, please. Can you write? Yeah, so many persons write every day. It's difficult to read all the messages, please. Tata Franklin, writing from Bamenda, says, I wish to thank you and other panelists in this educative program on the issue of Africans celebrating for Russia. I think Africans should not be blamed. This is because African countries cannot succeed to come out from the hands of Western countries without being protected by another world power. Okay? Yes. Good evening, Mr. Liu, and to the wonderful panelists tonight. I must comment they are handling the topic very well, especially Dr. Ako Paul Numbuma, writing from Yaoundé. Good evening. Hello?
Hello.
Yeah, good evening. Your name and where you are calling from, and your contribution.
Yes, I'm coming from Tuguru.
Hello? Hello? Hello, good evening. Please, when you're calling, can you stay away from your screen? Don't stand beside your screen. Stand far away from your screen, please. Hello?
Good evening.
Good evening, Kelvin.
Yes.
You're right. You are calling from Bamenda. Your contribution, please.
Yes, I just want to say congratulations to your program, your wonderful program, and to your panelists.
Okay.
What I have to say concerning the Russia and the Ukraine war in Africa is that any African country taking side is, to me, is not good. What I think as an African, as a youth, is that if Africans can deliberately fight for their independence, totally, from not depending from any of the so-called European powers that are coming to help Africa, things will better our lives, because to me, I'm not seeing any useful thing that can come out from there, because just as one of your panelists says, which is maybe from US, that all of them are driven towards a certain goal. They have the same objective. They may take different direction, but they have the same point that they are all driven to. So, to me, if Africans can fight for their independence without having anybody to rely on, I think it will be much better, because it's just like you are fighting to that country leave your country, then taking Russia. It's just like at times it's better to live with a devil that you know than to live with an angel that you don't know. You really understand? Yes, Mr. Liu.
Yeah, thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Hello?
Hello.
Yes, good evening.
Yeah, good evening.
Your name and where you're calling from?
I'm calling from Mutengena.
Your contribution, please.
My contribution is that I want that most of us African countries should learn that the white has they have already developed their own country, and there is an opportunity for us to learn that as they are fighting over there, it's an opportunity for us here to rebuild our own nation, to boycott from them. For as long as we keep on depending on those people, they will never lead us to Israel. As for Russia, they need to understand that once you already lost a threat, and you need to understand that a second's gun can never be recovered. So they just need to keep what they had. After the Soviet Union collapsed, they had nothing again to go back for. So that's why you see countries like America stand strong, because they knew that divided, they will never be as they are today. So they need to understand.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Good evening. Yeah, good evening. Your name and where you are calling from and your contribution.
Yeah, I'm calling from Bamenda Mbengu Road. My contribution is, I'm talking about Russia issue, Ukraine Russia issue.
Yeah.
Russia is a threat to the war. Russia is a threat to the war. One, Russia are the ones selling arms in the black market to Africans to kill themselves. So we Africans, I don't think that we can support Russia for anything. So we should even the country, even our country who are having embassy in Russia, they all threat them. So we should also send all the embassies that are in Africa, in our country, to go. Let them go back to Africa. So that's my contribution, because they don't want the world to live in peace. So thank you. That's all about my own contribution.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yes.
Wilson, you are calling from Bamenda. Your contribution, Wilson. Good evening.
Hello.
Yeah, Wilson, good evening.
Good evening, sir.
Yes, your contribution.
Yes, talking on this Russian issue. It's not important to know that all we have in Africa is what the world needs today. So we have is what the world needs today. So all the people, it's time for us to sit up and realize that we are the leaders of the was looking at the white skinned people to be the leaders of
Wilson, your lines are not clear. Can you call us back? But your point is made. We got your point, Wilson. Good evening, Mr. Liu, and to the wonderful panelists tonight. Okay, Daisy from Kumbase. Good evening, Mr. Liu, and to all the panelists just joining in. I must have missed a lot. Kudos to the entire team. Success says, Enil, don't do me today for Kribi. Okay, Success, we are sorry for you. Good evening. Your name and where you are calling from and your contribution.
Yeah, I'm calling from Kumba. Mr. Liu?
Yes, go on.
Yeah, in fact, I want to congratulate Dr. Ako for mastering that topic very well. In fact, I hate Russia. I want to use that word because in life, even in the day, I mean, in the life, you cannot just leave and crack a small child to torment this child. In fact, it is very, very bad. If I were in the government, I will tell, in fact, I look at Macky Sall as as a draft, as somebody who is right low. He doesn't reason. So, Mr. Liu, I want to say that this topic should still come back.
Okay.
So that we should teach our people, our Africans, and let Dr. Ako be there, and apostle, somebody. Apostle, there's one apostle there who always comes over your program. Please call that man too. Call that man of God. Let Dr. Ako be there, so that we should all talk, so that our people should hear them. Let this topic be hammered on in their heads very, very well. Thank you, Mr. Liu.
Thank you too. Mr. Muketa, good evening. Hello? Okay, Mr. Muketa is gone. He was calling from Limbe. I'll take some messages. Good evening to you all. Oops. Take this one last call and then I give some messages.
Hello.
Hello, good evening. Your name and where you are calling from and your contribution.
I'm Master Henry from, I'm in Douala now.
Okay.
I live in Kumba.
Okay. Your contribution.
My contribution is Africa should learn to stay on their own. Russia has nothing to help to Africa. He has nothing. If he was a good leader, Soviet Social Union could have not collapsed. He's coming to collapse Africa. He's coming to sell guns to Africa. Yes, because this is what happened with the English people in Cameroon, because they did not have an option. But we, the African, we have an option. We stay on our own.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello? 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 We'll have to stop taking calls now, and I'll take some messages, please. Good evening to you all. I appreciate your program, and that African leaders need deliverance from dependent spirit, and as such, African youths should take their destinies into their hands. Remain blessed. Thanks, Bro Henry is writing from Bamenda. Good evening, Mr. Leo. For me, I think Africans just have to focus on themselves, because the West and East depends on Africa for the technology. More so, they just have to develop a win-win cooperation with them. Mr. Leo, the problem we have is bad governance, and if that is fixed, Africa will be the best place to live in. Jethro is writing from Bamenda. Good evening to you, Jethro. McCloud says, I congratulate the panelists with the way they are handling the topic. Very few will understand that in the international scene, there is nothing like permanent enemy, no permanent friends, but interest and safeguard. Okay, thank you. Dr. Ako, how can you say the building of arms in Ukraine is not a threat to Russia? Can the U.S. allow Russia to build just a common military base in Mexico or Cuba? Secondly, the West is to be blamed for the calamities in Africa, because they plot to kill any Africa who dares to take Africa out of the economic freedom we need. You can name the leaders from Gaddafi to Lumumba to Sankara and even Nkrumah, who were either killed by CIA or other imperialists. And lastly, if the West is not evil, why do they prevent 54 African nations times 3 the size of Europe to build a nuclear plant? Good evening. Don't we think the government of Cameroon signed a military alliance with Russia because the Amber leaders was on the way to do so? Okay. Good evening. In the studio, Mr. Ako can talk more than all journalists and teachers in Cameroon combined. Courage, sir. Luis is writing from Limbe. I beg to disagree with you. Our problem is the West, because any president who doesn't defend their mineral agreements and interests is tagged a dictator and killed. E.g. Gaddafi. Democracy and human rights is a myth. What the West deem right, they impose it on everyone, e.g. homosexuality. But finally, I agree with you that we have to stop complaining and start working hard to grow. Yingcho Joel is writing from Yaoundé. Good evening to you. I'll get back to you. Ndifor Richard, are you there?
Yes, Leonard, I'm here.
Yes, you followed the submissions of the people of Cameroon across the regions and villages and towns. They think that Africa needs to fix itself, like you said earlier on.
Absolutely, and we need to move away. This issue of blaming, complaining is across the board. It doesn't only relate to us blaming the West. It also relates to us blaming the government, blaming everything around us. And you will find that in Africa, we spend quite a lot of time complaining than thinking about how we can work to improve the situation the way it is. In many circumstances, people are, it's always very easy to articulate the problems that we have. Everybody articulate those problems. When you begin a conversation with an African, especially a political conversation, the first thing that comes in mind is a list of complaints, a list of problems. They will articulate to you all the problems that Africa is facing. They will articulate to you all the problems that our leaders are facing and how our leaders have failed. But nobody is willing to articulate to you a way out of this problem, a solution to this problem. And when you even try to make a suggestion, a proposal as to how we can come out of this, they come after you, they start attacking you, and they tell you how it cannot even work. And so therefore, I think that it is not enough for us to just say that we should start finding a solution to our own problem. That is not enough. We need to really sit down and examine ourselves and ask ourselves, is it really necessary for us to be spending precious time laying down all the problems that we have, putting down all the complaints that we have? Because all of these things are it's very easy to identify the problems. Even if one child can tell you all the problems that Cameroon is facing, that is not a difficult thing to say. They can tell you how the Bia's government has failed, and they can articulate to you the different angles and the different areas where the Bia's government has failed. But the problem now is, how do we move from there? The moment we start developing that kind of mindset, the mindset of thinking about how we can move forward, how we can learn from the weaknesses, from the failures, the problems that have been created to us by the West, and how we can take ourselves up from there and move ahead, then that is when we will start to build Africa. That is when Africa will start liberating itself from these shackles of foreign influence. And in most cases, when you see those people who seem to be embracing Russia today and embracing all other European powers today, most of these people feel that we as Africans do not have this, we do not have the ability to actually address our own problem. We have that feeling that we need to rely on some other external forces to be able to address this problem for us. And for us, and for many of these people, the choice is between who among this foreign influence can we choose to come and address our problem. That is not the kind of line of thinking that we as Africans, we should be having. We should be having the thinking of us thinking of our own problem, looking at how we can address this problem by ourselves, sitting down on the table and finding out solution. If we could spend even half the time we spend talking about articulating the problems, if we spend just half that time to think about a way out of the problem, then we would have gone further. We would have moved, we would have covered a whole milestone in addressing the problems that we have in Africa. And so therefore, I believe and I agree with all the other people, all the speakers and the people who are talking, but I add that we should start being effectively engaged in discussing solutions rather than discussing problems. We should be engaged in discussing solutions rather than discussing or blaming X, Y, or Z. It doesn't help us. Okay. Another thing that we seem to be clinging on is this attitude of thinking that if an institution, if the leadership of an institution is failing, that institution should just be destroyed. It should be demolished. If Biya is not ruling Cameroon well, then Cameroon has to go down. Cameroon has to be destroyed. If the leader of the MRC party is not doing well, then the MRC party needs to be destroyed and something else come up. You cannot build. We cannot build with that kind of mentality. If there is a failure in leadership, let us look at how do we bring in better leaders, new leaders, to improve on the situation the way they are.
Okay, thank you very much, Ndifor. Good evening, Mr. Liu. For me, I think Africans just have to fix themselves. Thank you very much. Good evening. It's Dennis from Kumba. I really enjoy your program. Good evening to you, Dennis. Good evening, Mr. Liu, and everyone in the studio. I want to thank you and your panelists for educating Africans. It is really shameful and disgraceful for African leaders on how much concern they show or talk about the Russia and Ukraine war when they are so silent for decades, watching their own brothers and sisters killing themselves. Western countries have built up a foundation for everyone, including foreigners, to feel at home when it concerns security and equality as human beings. The police are the people's friends, while in Africa the police are enemies and a threat to its citizens. Prince Bile is writing from Berlin in Germany. Good evening to you. Prince always contributing. Good evening, Mr. Liu. The bodies such as UN and AU are a failure, so there is need for a new international body to develop. Gilbert is writing from Bomenda. Good evening, Mr. Liu. Putin is disturbing world peace, but has forgotten that nobody can be greater than Boris Nematov, who was shot in Moscow after the 28th of June of NATO summit in Madrid. Russia will bleed. Okay. Good. Once more evening. Greetings from Doctor from Yaoundé. I wish to get in contact with Ntakul. Okay, can you write to me after Ntakul was yesterday? Just write to me after. I'll send you their number, please. Mr. Liu, thanks for your laudable and educative programs, especially on debates on Africa and Cameroonians affairs. As concerns those who oppose Russian invasion of Ukraine, I favor Russia for its stand for the defense of Warsaw, might, without which the supposed ideology for the necessary revival of UNO cannot be met, given that Ukraine's intent to align with NATO is a dangerous incognito threat to Warsaw allies or Russia in particular. Thus, if Putin does not react fast, then it's clear that NATO would take advantage of the blueprints of Perestroika to reduce Russia's might as a world power in modern history. In this, I say kudos to Putin in pursuit for a more defined UNO, not that which is solely dominated on selfish interests of the monster West. Yes, Ndile Joseph is writing there. Good evening to you, Ndile. This one says, no permanent friends, no enemies, but permanent interests. Russia has also been at forefront of African liberation from South Africa, Angola to Cape Verde. The West has also been arming tyrants, wicked rulers. Okay. Good evening, Mr. Leo. Please, can I have Dr. Ako's number? Ma Evelyn is writing from Boya. Ma Evelyn, can you write to me after the program, please? Just write to me after the program. I'll send you Dr. Ako's number. Yes, how do we fix ourselves away from what is happening? Do you have the impression that Africa is seeing the war in Ukraine and Russia as an opportunity and has called for an emergency AU summit to rethink Africa and then refocus its investments?
Exactly. That is what we're thinking. But again, it's shocking that at this very moment that I'm talking to you, African delegation were moving for a UNESCO-organized education reformation seminar abroad. And I asked myself, for all these years, with all the education we have had, should our educational system be pegged to one foreign system that does not answer the reality within the African continent? Education is pegged on solving the problems of the people. Any education that does not better off the environment of the people, then is not needed. You cannot attend a school in France and you think that you will use the knowledge base in that university to solve African problems. Instead, Africans need to drive an agenda for themselves. I was happy with the organization of a meeting of African head of state, both present, active, and those who are out of power by President Kagame on the subject they asked, the Africa we need, the Africa that we want. And I saw a most respectable member like Thabo Mbeki giving a lot of lessons. What Africa we want? Africa free of wars, Africa free of corruption, Africa where the education is capable of answering and responding to African problems, Africa where leadership is not meant for a few, where there is a possibility that others can have access, where resources can easily be distributed. The Africa we want is that Africa that at the time a crisis or war is going on between those we thought are going to misuse or mismanage us, we should equally be sitting at the same time to organize a seminar that will give a positive response to Western nations. We need Africa that will draft a new, what we call in Europe, they'll tell you of a common agricultural policy, a common fishery policy, a common educational policy. We will not adopt the system of education in the European Union and people will tell you that it's working well, it is the best. The environments are quite different. In legal transplant, we understand and know very well that homosexuality is not part of Africa and should not even form part of Africa. We were not born in such an environment, and that we believe on the values that Africans defend. We have to stand within it that the war in Ukraine should give us more of our understanding to take a strict position. And when they ask, where is the African position? The African position is that with the ongoing war, we can get something for ourselves, not what is convenient to either parties. We are not concerned about wars because we have suffered the impact of those wars. One of the highest declarations people too have never known is that after the Second World War, the Europeans took upon themselves that it is the last war Europe is fighting and that never should there be war within any European borders. And you can imagine, 70 years gone, Europe should be very proud that the test is presently what we are feeling in Ukraine. And that is why they are shocking it, because it's one of the principles of the aftermath of the Second World War. Can Africans sign a general agreement within the AU to silence guns within the African borders?
Good evening, Mukete. Hello? Mukete is gone, just land. He's been insisting, that's why I
that is what I'm saying, that within the time, if Africans can give a common response, can we stop the fighting in Africa? We just saw a tussle within Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo. It is sad that we find Africa, we accuse Ukraine, and another country like the Democratic Republic of Congo is going through a border crisis with Rwanda. The AU is yet to conduct a fact-finding mission. What is happening? The Congolese, the people of the Democratic of Congo are saying that there is a transposition. Okay.
Mukete, good evening.
Good evening.
Yeah, you're calling from Limbe. Your contribution.
Yes. Good evening. Thank you for the program. Hello.
Yes, right on, Mukete.
All right. I just want to make my contribution with respect to the ongoing program.
Okay.
Yeah, I want to first of all ask for those who want to blame Putin. Yes, I just want to. I want to find out from those who want to blame Putin over this war. Let those people tell me how many African countries did Russia colonize? Secondly, if you find African leaders clamoring now with respect to that war, they are asking the position of beggars because something is going wrong with those grains stuck at the Black Sea. instead of them developing their own agriculture, they are begging for grain from Ukraine. So it is high time Africans should learn how to improve on their agriculture. The war in Ukraine is an eye-opener to African countries. They should learn to develop their own agriculture, because depending on grain from Russia can land African countries into serious problem.
Mukete,
now,
can you now answer my question?
Yes, it's okay.
How many African countries did Ukraine colonize?
None.
Okay.
Yeah, but the argument here is that the West, we should not. None, of course, none. But how many countries did Russia also colonize?
Okay. Mukete, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello. Okay. Hello, good evening. Samuel Luis, calling from Kumba. How are you? We are doing good out here. Your contribution, please.
I want to say good evening to Dr. Aku, John Aku beside you there. And I also want African people to understand what we are going through. Yes, what I want to say is that we have to understand our problem here in Africa, and we have to know what is our problem and what we want. Because you see, Mr. Leo, if you want to talk about the destruction of Africa, we don't have any other country than France. Because if you want to talk about killing of Colonel Mohamed Gaddafi, it's France. If you want to talk about Rwanda genocide, it's France. If you want to talk about this worst currency, we call it slave currency, come from France. So we must know a exact problem in Africa, and what is affecting Africa is France, no any other country, and France found in Europe. So to remove this block that is blocking African economy, African political system that can make African better to African people is France,
okay.
No any other country.
Thank
so
you.
To accompany Africa to come out to this situation, we need another Western world country like Russia to get Africa out of this situation.
Okay,
thank you very much. Tomorrow is another day.
Thank you very much. Sama Luis calling there from Kumba. We are no longer going to take any call. Yeah, good evening. This is the last call. Don't call again, please. Your name and where you're calling from.
Good evening. Pascal from Douala.
Okay, go on.
Yes. First of all, I will thank you guys for this, for the topic of today, and I hope that you will always bring this topic. I like it. It's so good.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. First of all, I'll start with those people who really actually support Russia. I really wonder what the kind of life, the kind of war they are living in, because it makes no sense. It makes no logical sense that Russia invades Ukraine, a smaller, a less powerful country like Ukraine, just invade them and then just begin to kind of torment the people. War is not good. At this moment, in the 21st century, you don't just go for war like that. And it's so surprising to see many Cameroonians who actually really sit down and try to defend Russia for their actions. It's actually disgraceful, shameful. I even have, for example, I have a neighbor. I was arguing with a neighbor last time. I asked them, okay, the West is bad, really bad. The United States is bad. Yeah, Europe is evil. Russia is good. Now, if you are given a passport, two passports, a Russian passport and an American passport, which one are you really going to take right now, straight away? He said America. I said, what? You take America, you choose American passport over Russian passport, and then you support Russia for all of these things. Secondly, people don't really understand. People don't really understand what is really the war, the way the war functions in America or or Europe or the West. This is their belief. They believe that each and every one of us are free. We are actually free to do anything we actually want, provided we don't hurt other that kind of system. They believe in kind of fascist level. If Putin gets up today and decide that the whole of Russia will not eat rice, he answered that nobody eats rice, but you can't.
Thank you very much. Thank you. No more calling. Stop the calls, please. We want to say thank you to you, Doctor, for coming and educating our televiewers tonight.
Yeah, the pleasure always on my Media Prime. Being and sharing knowledge is what we were trained to do, and within everything, Africa should learn to be self-independent, self-reliant. Then it can be an actor in international politics. For now, we still need time.
Okay. We also want to say thank you to you, Ndifor, for accepting to be part of today's edition of the program.
Thank you so much, Leonard, and thank you for always having me on the program. And I want to thank my co-panelists and also the viewers for their time. And Leonard, let me take this opportunity to thank Chairman Frundi for the trust and confidence in me. And I am praying and hoping that I'm going to make my own contribution to improve not only the party, the SDF, but also our country, Cameroon.
Okay, we unfortunately were not able to have Andrin. Atem Ebako was supposed to contribute from Uganda, connection issues, and Lucas, who was caught in traffic from his way. He left Yaoundé this morning. He was caught in traffic, so he could not join us this evening. We want to thank you all who took time off to watch the program, especially you who participated by calling and sending text messages. We also want to thank the production team, Eli and Desmond, and all of you guys at the broadcasting, not forgetting you, Tabi Tambe Bryant, supervising the work we do out here. Stay blessed. Bye-bye.